Good morning, everyone. This is John Holyvold. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Dairy Business Association. I appreciate you all joining us today for this presentation about opportunities in the renewable natural gas space. We're very honored to have as a sponsor for this presentation UA 400, which is the local pipe trades union in northeastern Wisconsin. On behalf of that organization, we have Dustin Delsman. He's the business agent for UA 400. I think this partnership and their sponsorship of this particular webinar is a great example of the economic reach of ag projects. Really, we don't always think about this connection, but the reality is these projects and these projects on farm mean real investment and jobs for those folks in the pipe trades. So, Justin, would you say a few words before I introduce our presenters?
Absolutely, John. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. As John mentioned, my name is Dustin Delsman. I'm a business representative for Plumbers and Steam Fitters UA Local 400. UA 400 has the capacity to provide highly skilled and qualified workers for the renewable natural gas construction industry. UA 400's 60,000 plus square foot training center is the premier location in northeast Wisconsin for cultivating a highly skilled workforce equipped with the knowledge necessary to build the next RNG piping system. Workers from UA 400 have prefabricated and installed miles of piping on RNG projects in Grand Marsh, Rosendale, Denmark, and Luxembourg, and we look to continue to assist the industry on future projects. For more information regarding UA 400 and our contractors, please contact your dairy business associate or check us out on our website, ua400.org. We appreciate today's sponsorship opportunity and the partnership with the Dairy Business Association, and we hope you enjoy the RNG webinar today. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, John.
Thanks, Dustin. Again, we really appreciate your support. I'm going to introduce two folks who I think are known quantities to a lot of the people who are participating in today's webinar. I'll keep my introductions brief, but the first is Dave Crass. Dave is a farm kid, dairy farm kid turned lawyer, near and dear to my heart since I'm also a farm kid turned lawyer. He works for Michael Best as a presence at their Madison office, but is now the managing partner at their DC office. He also chairs their agribusiness, food and beverage and industry group. He's been a longtime DBA supporter, been very involved in our organization since its inception, so we're always glad to hear from Dave. Also, we have Jordan Hamiden. Jordan's also a lawyer at Michael Best. He's works out of their Madison office. He's been involved in some litigation that's close to the dairy industry side of things. He also chairs that firm's energy industry group. So I'll turn it over to those folks. If as people are listening, they have questions that come to mind, feel free to type those in the question box on your side, and we'll moderate a Q&A at the end of their presentation. Thanks again to Dave and Jordan.
Thanks very much, John. This is Dave. Good morning, everyone, and thanks as well, not only the DBA for putting this on, but to UA 400 for the sponsorship. We're very excited to be talking with you because we have long worked with DBA to maximize revenue streams to the farm gate. Whether John and I and others are working on a project right now dealing with environmental service markets such as water quality trading that I'm sure you'll have heard about and we'll hear about more as we move forward with this project. From the beginning of, we've also worked with a lot of dairy digester owners in terms of maximizing their environmental service markets such as CARB credits, California Air Resources Board credits. And we are now very active with a lot of our dairy farm clients pursuing the renewable natural gas gold rush, if you will. One comment about, of course, the time that we're in right now, President-elect Biden and the Biden-Harris administration have already begun to announce their intention to issue executive orders on climate change and renewables, and that is going to create, certainly continue to support the opportunities that we're talking about today as opportunities moving into the future, and it will, in all likelihood, create even more opportunities to return that value add to the farm gate. We're also working very closely with Nutrient, that is part of the Net Zero initiative announced recently from the Dairy Innovation Center, and all of these initiatives sort of combine to, keep dairy out in front, if you will, on the sustainability piece, but then also do it in a way that provides economic return, which is so critical, avoiding a regulatory approach in all possible respects, and rather developing a market-based approach which would return value to the farm gate. Great being with you. As John indicated, a long-time fan and supporter of DBA and its farmer members, and just happy to continue to connect with DBA as we move forward in the future. I'm going to turn it over now to Jordan for, as I call it, the meat and potatoes of this presentation. And Jordan's going to walk us through our experience with these projects and the critical considerations that you need to think about as you're approached by developers moving forward in these times. Jordan?
Thank you very much, Dave, and I echo all the thank yous that Dave gave and his observations as well. I'm very honored to be part of this. Dave, if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, now, for some reason, Joanna, now I am not able to advance the slide, so if you take care of that, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. And as Dave said, what I'm going to be presenting here is based on the accumulation of about 4 years of experience on these renewable natural gas deals. Just to give you a little bit of background, the reason we're even here talking about it is because dairy farms have the most potential economically for participation in this California low carbon fuel standard, because dairy farms have the most to gain from using a digester to avoid emitting methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So they came into Wisconsin about 4 years ago with a big pile of documents. I'm talking about a developer on the energy side wanting to court large dairy farms to buy the gas out of their digesters. So representing the farms, I was able to work with those developers to develop farm-friendly documents to make the deal profitable and beneficial for the farms. So where we started was with anaerobic digesters. Those aren't new to anybody. I mean, those have been, decade or two already. And the way they started in Wisconsin was generally on some of the larger farms, dairy farms, to anaerobically digest manure and to make natural gas, biogas, I'll call it, from those digesters, and then to make electricity, which was then used to power the farm operations and the boilers, and to probably more importantly, then sell energy to the energy utilities. Now, when this all started, the utilities had an incentive because Wisconsin law requires utilities to get 10% of their total power load from renewable resources. Well, that requirement was fully subscribed, I would say, over a decade ago. And so there's no incentive for utilities to be buying electricity from digesters anymore. Well, along comes this California Low Carbon Fuel Standard program, which has the goal, and I'll talk about it more on the next slide, of avoiding carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon and methane. But the point for all of us here today is that there's a huge potential benefit to Wisconsin farms, not only in dollar terms, but also in nutrient management opportunities as well. And the next slide. So let's talk about this low carbon fuel standard. It's very much a California program, and here's how it works. So California has decided, look, we want our transportation fuels to have a lower and lower carbon intensity level, meaning we are trying to move away from fossil fuels and into fuels that are produced from renewable sources. And they have specific goals to be reached by 2030 and then 2035. If a fuel dispenser's fuel, that means somebody's selling gas in California for transportation fuel, doesn't meet those carbon intensity standards, it has to purchase the low carbon fuel standard credits to offset that failure. So somebody just selling straight gas, fossil gasoline is going to have to participate in this. So they serve as an offset, these credits. And they're considered an offset only if the activity for generating those credits results in avoided greenhouse gas emissions and comes from a biological source. Bingo, enter dairy farms, because cow manure is among the best performing offset from a carbon intensity standpoint. The CI, or carbon intensity score, that gets assigned to the dairy, the industry's found that these CI scores are the most beneficial for dairies. Close behind would be swine, but dairies, not close behind, but the next best would be swine manure, but cow manure is the best. Next slide. So, and this may be not be news to many of you, but I think it's important to level set a little bit here. We've got to talk about how an RNG project works. So how it works is you got to have a digester, and that digester takes manures, it digests the solids in the manures, and it sends it to the renewable natural gas equipment that would be placed at the farm. Usually people are familiar with what a digester looks like and how big of a footprint it has. So you not only need that, but this renewable natural gas equipment, you can typically get it on a 100-foot by 100-foot campus. So any developer coming in is going to need land rights, access, and lease for that 100-foot by 100-foot square where they're going to put this gas equipment on. That gas equipment is referred to often now as things are getting more developed in the industry as a biogas upgrade plant, or a BUP. And so what that renewable natural gas equipment does is it's basically scrubs the biogas coming out of the digester of impurities, and then it compresses it and makes it into a pipeline quality gas. That gas then gets trucked to an interstate pipeline, okay, and gets injected. Or if the pipeline runs through the farm property, it gets injected right there on site if there's a chance to do that. That's actually a gold mine economically, because it costs a lot to compress and truck this gas to injection points. Where the economic magic then happens is the gas is then sold by contract to a dispenser in California that then markets it. Okay, so an important, interesting point here is that gas molecule doesn't have to make it to California through the pipeline, because people don't account for gas that way. You just have to have what's called a contract path for the gas to get there from Wisconsin. Next slide. So let's talk about what the business structure of these projects looks like. What is it going to look like for you and your farm? Well, if you don't have a digester, up until very recently, what would happen is the developer would come in, build a digester, build the BUP, take care of everything downstream of that to get it to California, and just buy your manure. Okay, the economics of that go up and down. They're not fantastic. I mean, it's a revenue stream. I'm thinking pennies per gallon of manure. 2, 3, 4 cents, something like that. It depends on the deal. That is still a viable option, but our farmers are starting to see, look, I'm sophisticated enough to not only run this operation, but to also deal with some of the risks that come with, maybe having or owning part of a digester. or even owning the whole thing. And that gets us to the next potential structure, which is probably just as common. So if there's a digester already on site, it's a pretty easy no-brainer that then the farm continues to own the digester and sells the biogas. There's a little bit better of an economic benefit. I would actually say quite a bit greater economic benefit. Slightly more risk because the risk of not producing the biogas in the digester will rest with the farm, and the farm's going to have to bring people in to deal with the digester issues. And I know some of the people on the phone have had digesters or are familiar with digesters and know that they can be kind of finicky. Usually the form of benefit, it comes not in a per unit payout. Some do, but here's where you start getting into the sharing of profits with the developer, which is a much greater economic benefit to the farm than selling manure for pennies on the gallon. I suppose the next, and these are not all of the potential business structures, folks. These are just three of the more common at the bookends and one in the middle, because these structures are only as limited as someone's imagination, and we put different ones together than these. But the other bookend here would be where the farm owns the entire project. Certainly the greatest economic benefit, but there's a lot higher risk. You're not only producing the manure, but you have to have a digester that works to produce raw biogas, and then you have to manage and take care of the biogas upgrade facility or plant and get the gas into a truck, get that truck down the road and get it injected into a pipe, and make sure that that gas is getting sold to somewhere in California that will qualify for LCFS credits. Not to say that can't be done. There are farms that are starting to take an interest in doing this, and the ones that can pull it off are going to make a lot of money. Next slide.
Jordan, if I could just interject on that last slide real briefly. We are seeing companies with respect to the second and third bullet coming in that have some digester management experience their role would be, to the extent that the farm has more ownership and control over the entire project, that you can contract with these companies to actually manage the operation of the digester and other equipment. So it's not something that a farm needs to necessarily do on its own with its own W-2 employees. Rather, you can contract for that service. Thanks.
Oh, Dave, that's a very, very good point. And in fact, where we're starting to see farms take ownership of these entire projects, what they're doing is they're working with entities that do the soup to nuts sort of consulting, O&M, that sort of thing that Dave just mentioned. In fact, that's really the model. And in exchange for that, they're going to take a percentage of the profits, but it still leaves the lion's share of the profit in the farm's hands. And for a let's say 5,000 cow dairy, we're talking millions of dollars a year in potential projects. Now, what's it going to do to your? And at this point, what I'd like to make a point about the size of farms here, because of course the developers coming into the state, they're going to want to go for what I'll call the low-hanging fruit, which means a big scale in a small area. And so that's why it's the larger farms that have seen the action here. And I think there's an opportunity to be had. If someone told me I couldn't practice law anymore, I think the first thing I would do is try to figure out how to get some of these smaller farms into this game. And one of the ways I would do that is to work with smaller farms in given geographic areas cooperatively, where you figure out somehow how to economically concentrate manure at one point, to have a digester, and do it sort of on a cooperative deal. But I wanted to make that point because I know our audience is diverse here in terms of farm size, and this is not just for large operations. I think there's a future here for smaller operations too.
Yeah.
So anyway,
just to highlight that, Yeah, just to highlight that point, Jordan. Sorry to do a little tag team here, but like Brightmark just purchased the digester in the town of Dane. That receives manure from 3 farms, and it is that digester project is managed by Clean Fuel Partners, which is one of these management companies that I talk about, right? And then they are doing the scrubbing, or Brightmark is doing the scrubbing and trucking and injecting at the Dane County landfill, so into the interstate pipeline there. So that's an example of smaller dairies that probably couldn't economically on their own necessarily gain the benefit here, but by a community digester type approach, it's possible. And Jordan, could you also I've also found it very helpful when you're talking about this to level set as to pricing difference. A decatherm of plain old natural gas generally yeah, if you could talk about that.
Sure. First of all, very, very good point on that example of the community digester. And then, to Dave's point, what he's talking about is, what economic benefit are we talking about here at the end of the pipeline? To give you some sense of that, it's dramatic. If I'm going to go on the market today and I'm going to buy a decatherm of natural gas just to heat my factory or my farm or provide power, I'm going to pay about $2.50 to $3 for a decatherm of gas. The value of a decatherm of renewable gas is almost 50 times that, because the LCFS credits right now, and it varies daily, but right now they're trading between 80 and $100 a decatherm. Plus, you're going to get the $2.50 to $3 per decatherm for the raw gas, I'll call it, the brown gas. Then there are federal subsidies called RINs under the National Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS. These RINs, and a RIN is a renewable identification number that attaches to every unit of renewable fuel, are worth, I believe, somewhere between 50 cents and $1 right now. So those pale in comparison, obviously, to that $80 to $100 per decatherm price for gas. But I tell you, when I first learned that, I'm like, how can that be possible? Well, it's possible because California's made a very strong policy choice, and they are not making the people pay for it. Well, indirectly, the people are paying for it at the pump, for sure, okay? But they've made a very strong policy choice that they want their fuel carbon intensity to go down because of the strong feelings of that state's policy on global warming and on local pollution. So that's what contributes to the value. Now, adding on to that, Dave, is the point of, well, how long does this gravy train go on? People in this industry are very confident that any investment they make up to about 2024 will remain qualified for the LCFS credits and will pay out for the life of the project. For projects installed after that, there's a bit of an open question, but people are confident that California is going to continue down this policy and, if anything, intensify it rather than walk away from it. So now we come to issues common to RNG projects. How is this going to impact your farm? And that's really something to think about, because after all, your core competency is milking cows and running that farm. And all of the LCFS credits in the world are not going to do you much good if you can't sustain the basic farming operation that gave rise to the opportunity in the first place. So some of the things you have to think about is rerouting waste streams. For example, you've got a feed pad and you've got a leachate waste stream that's been approved by DNR under the WPDES permit, with first flush going, into the lagoon, and then, the remainder going through, although they're falling out of favor with the DNR, down a vegetative treatment area or some other thing. You've got to watch out, because these developers coming in and building digesters, making all these capital investments, are not going to want that waste stream going into the digester. Why? Because it'll reduce your carbon intensity score and reduce the amount of money that can be made. So sometimes investments have to be made up front to reroute some of those waste streams. Well, we got to make sure in entering into those deals with developers that the costs for that are fairly allocated. Bedding is another issue. Sand bedding is not ideal for these projects because sand settles out into the digester. It causes problems. You end up with a lower carbon intensity or a worse carbon intensity score. And so often it's found to be economically beneficial to transition from sand to solids bedding. Well, then what is that going to do? You're going to have to change a whole bunch of stuff. Even just getting the sand out of the barns is going to break those brisket locators, and it's going to result in damage to piping. You're going to want to replace that. You're going to need a dryer to get those solids out of the digester to a moisture content that's acceptable. So, those are things to think about and make sure that you address when you enter into these agreements. Another thing that people need to be aware of is that of course, anything coming out of that digester other than gas, meaning all the liquid, solids, and so on, the farm's going to have to handle those. So usually the existing manure storage capability is enough to handle that. But here's where it gets problematic, is that they're also going to require the farm to accept the condensate that comes out of those BUPs, the biogas upgrade plant. And what's the matter with that? You've got a very high acidic content in some of that condensate that if it gets rerouted back to the lagoon is going to cause erosion of lagoon materials. So, they're starting to see that. So now what you have to do is you've got to upfront either put in a system that's going to make sure that your earlier investments don't get compromised, like your lagoon integrity and so on. And you're going to have to put the onus on the developer or fairly allocate the risk if something does happen. The second thing to worry about is, well, who's going to control methods and practices in the digester, in the BUP, and so on? Well, these developers are going to tell you, look, if there's insufficient biogas coming out of that digester, we're going to have the right to step in and figure out what's wrong and take care of it. Well, the question is then, how far upstream from the digester are you going to let that developer go? Are you going to let that developer tell you what to feed the cows? And that's where I'm sure most of the people who run these operations on the phone right now would start to pucker up a little bit and say, no, we're not going to do that, right? But that's what they're going to want. So that's sort of the forces that need to be balanced out there. It is, at the end of the day, what the farm has to realize is, well, there's someone coming in here making anywhere for a 5,000 cow farm, and depending on whether there's a digester that needs to be built, we're talking a $15 to $50 million investment. So of course they're going to want, if things start to go awry, they're going to really want some power to change things. So that's a huge thing to pay attention to and be balanced, particularly when it comes to the specifications for the manure. What it can contain, what it can't, and the specifications for the gas coming out of the digester in terms of what the percentage of certain constituents can be, oxygen, nitrogen, and so on.
Yeah, so Jordan, on that, if I can just interject on that point, this whole issue of, the specs of manure going in and the specs of gas being produced, we've seen some projects where then the developer reserves to itself the right to bring supplemental manure onto the farm. Remember, we're not making electrons here, so they're not going to bring in, fat soils and greases to generate up the electricity, the methane content that way, because that would invalidate it from the LCFS. So what they would be doing is bringing in supplemental manure. Now that, of course, you all know, raises regulatory issues with WPDS permit compliance. Now you have nutrient management obligation for somebody else's manure. So you have to really watch that set of issues, and we would help negotiate around those issues. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, very good point. And that leads me to think of another thing that's useful to share, which is, Dave and I together have probably seen 10 developers coming through the state. Some of them are very sophisticated. I'll give you an example. One of them is called Rev LNG. They are a subsidiary, or at least that they're financed by DTE, which is an affiliate of Detroit Edison. There's no shortage of cash there. They know what they're doing. When they enter into a deal, they get the stuff built. But I'll tell you, you're probably not going to get the best deal there, because they leverage their expertise, they leverage their ability to get things done and their cash position and so on. The point is that there's a variance among these developers in how much they're willing to share and in how sophisticated and experienced they are. And some strike a great balance. But I will tell you what's super important is to but you're going to be much more comfortable when you see a developer who understands how dairy farms work. And there are some who have boots on the ground here in Wisconsin who will go around and work with the farms, who either have farms themselves or are already in the business of digesters and other things, which makes them eminently qualified to talk about this stuff. And then there are people who are office workers who come around and talk about what their company can do for you. Just be super cognizant that at the end of the day, they need to have the on-the-ground expertise, whether it's their own or whether they have close alliances with people. One of the things you're going to want to talk about very early on is, how does that project work into the farm day-to-day operation? How is it going to work and impact issues of safety, efficiency, transportation? Where are they going to load these trucks? Where are they going to turn them around? How's it going to affect your neighbors? You want to make sure that you sort of think of those issues up front. I think finally, and probably most importantly, for your businesses and your families, you're going to want to think about what are the ways to get out of these contracts if things don't work out. Of course, they're going to be making these huge tens of millions of dollars of investment that I suggested a moment ago. And they're going to want long contract terms, and that's rational. They should. But what if things go wrong? The contract terms that we're seeing now are anywhere between 15 and 25 years. Those are needed not only to pay out the debt and equity that comes to those deals, but to maximize the opportunity to get the profit out of that investment. At the same time, there needs to be ways for the farm to gracefully exit if it just doesn't work out for them anymore. I'll give you an example. If the farm gets conditions in its WPDES permit that just make it uneconomical to farm anymore, there is no reason why the farm should be required to make a decision to stay in business only to make sure that the developer on the other end gets their profit opportunity. So there are lots of things to think about there. There could be regulatory reasons. You might want at some point to have the ability to either expand your farm, and if the developer doesn't have the wherewithal to take advantage of that, to then work with other developers, and so on. So some other major issues you're going to want to think about. Dave Kress already talked to you about developer importation of manure and or gas. Particularly with manure, there's going to be regulatory implications there, bringing more manure on your property, because what does that mean? It's going to go into the digester, and the digestate's going to come out into your lagoon. Environmental and permitting are issues you're going to have to think about up front and talk to your people about before you sign any contracts. Project completion. This is the biggest one. I cannot believe the number of proposals I've seen where the developer comes in and just says, okay, you're going to be exclusive with us, and we're going to build this project at some point. Well, no, at some point it's not good enough, because we all know we have a valuable commodity here, whether in the form of manure or biogas. And we're going to make sure that it gets taken advantage of in a reasonable amount of time. So every agreement I've ever negotiated here has very clear, enforceable project completion dates and milestones along the way. And if they don't meet them, they're gone. I've already had agreements that we've terminated because of that. And finally, both Dave and I have mentioned this throughout this presentation. You really got to have the right talent and the right team. You don't want somebody who this is their first rodeo, either on a consultant or a legal or a finance or anything else. And these teams that are coming around now and soliciting farms are getting smarter about this, and they're building in that talent so that they don't have to go outside, or they're creating alliances so that they have packages ready, whether it's the digester provider, whether it's the engineering, or the people constructing. These developers have put together teams to make sure it gets done right. I think that's all we had to say, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions for Dave and myself, or topics for discussion, and I'll stop there.
I'll just
Thanks, Jordan.
add. Oh, I'm sorry, John. I was just going to add there. We talked earlier about, size of operation and getting smaller farms together potentially on a hub and spoke model versus, larger operations. What would you say, Jordan, in your experience? And then I also want to ask you to address, because you mentioned having the right team, and including that right team is someone who can work with the farm to identify what their CI score is, which then defines the opportunity. So get to that one in a minute. But what are you seeing, Jordan, in terms of breakpoints of what developers, would say would be viable, on a size of operation? Is it 2,500 cows and up? Is it 4,000 cows and up? Where is that breakpoint in terms of defining smaller versus something that would be feasible on a one-stop basis?
Yeah, so I think that, you got 4,000 or 5,000 cows or more, it's a no-brainer. You can pretty much live with any, any CI score that you would typically find within the range of CI scores that are given to dairies. You start getting down around the 3,000 cow range, pencils get sharpened, and CI scores matter a lot more. Right now, I'm dealing with an operation between 1,000 and 2,000 cows that might actually work. But I'll tell you, those pencils are sharp, and their negotiating wiggle room is very, very small. And the number of developers that are currently interested in that level of operation are few. And for better or worse, the ones that are interested are going to be the ones that are not in a position to go around and say, hey, we've already got 5,000 cow farms under our belt, and wow, we'd like to start with yours now. So you're going to see a little bit of a proportionate relationship between how experienced they are and how low they're willing to go in terms of size for a single farm. And so, Dave, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I'm seeing.
No, it does. It does. And then could you address just real quickly, because your last point about having the right team involved, this is a new world to dairy farmers, and they're being presented with proposals that, score their farm as to what the economic return is. And, if you're not working with someone who's looking out for your interests, you don't really have a basis to contest some of that. So, in negotiation. So I just wanted you to address that as well.
Yeah, that's important. Right at the front end of it, you've got somebody coming to you with a letter of intent they want you to sign, particularly where they're going to they're going to be buying biogas or going to be wanting you to have a digester, not just buying your manure. And even if they are buying your manure, we have contacts with folks that do pretty economically. They do the upfront assessment for what the carbon intensity score would be, what some other challenges might be for your farm. Now, as you might imagine, these folks are pretty busy, and we keep our fingers on the pulse, and we can help direct you to someone who at the particular time is available and has your farm in his or her niche in terms of what they're doing. So that's an important step.
That's
Thanks
it for
again,
me, John.
Jordan and Dave, we appreciate it. We're going to run through some questions. I think our first question might have just been addressed. It was about how big a farm needs to be to get into the game. And it sounds like pretty easy for some of the folks above 4,000, maybe a little more difficult below that, but also that maybe over time we'll see more and more opportunities for those who are smaller in size. A question about how close to a gas pipeline is that typical project, or what are they looking at? How are they identifying that? What's an acceptable range?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at that, and then Jordan can tell me I'm full of it. My understanding is that it's farther that a project can be economically viable by trucking to the injection point in the interstate pipeline, and it's farther than you would think. I've heard 150 to 200 miles radius of an injection point that developers are looking and can still pencil out a profitable project. Jordan, do you have a different answer than that?
I don't, but it's so farm dependent because it's part of the whole CI score process. How far you have to take it. So it depends on, what are the other factors that go into a CI score, what methane emissions are avoided, and so on. But I, like Dave, have heard that, 140 miles is economical depending on the farm. And I don't think there's anywhere in the state of Wisconsin where you don't have a pipeline within, a suitable pipeline within that range. The other thing is, what we're talking about is really not is a pipeline available, but is an injection point available. So what you're seeing now is, there's an injection point 150 miles away, but if we spend a couple $1 million, we can actually piggyback on someone else's injection point or actually create one. And I've got a farm or two that have done that. So yeah, that's highly variable.
A couple of follow-up points to that, Jordan. One of the questions we did get in also was just to ask you all to define the CI score again. So since you used that term again in your answer, might be helpful to do that. And the other follow-up to that is, when you're talking about injection points, give us some examples of what those would be short of a normal pipeline.
Okay, so an injection point, I'll take that question first. I've not looked at one. I need to go out and see one, but I just did an agreement for the construction of one. And what these are stations which will unload the compressed natural gas, depressurize it to the right pressure for that pipe, and inject it safely and within, the parameters of safety and other regulations into that pipe. That's going to be in cooperation and an agreement with the pipeline owner, whether that's Guardian or whoever it might be. So that's what an injection point is. And then remind me, sir, what the other question was? Oh yeah,
we're looking
carbon
for
intensity
a redefinition of CI. Yeah.
Yeah. Carbon intensity score is a score that's assigned basically to give an idea of how much methane are we going to avoid emitting into the atmosphere by putting the manure in a digester and making renewable natural gas. Okay? And I will tell you that, my clients have paid others to figure this out for them, but it has to do with a lot of different factors in the farm itself. What are you bedding with? How is the manure handled? If you have a digester, are there improvements to the digester that can be made, and so on? And actually, the carbon intensity score, the lower the number, the better off you are. So a very, very good score for a dairy would be -300. And you pretty much won't see people making investments if it's much above -150. So I cannot pretend to be an expert on how those scores are accumulated, but they are definitely set and approved by the California Air Resources Board. And in fact, every project that gets done has to make an application to the California Air Resources Board for the issuance of a final carbon intensity score, which will then determine the economic value of the project. But going in to those applications, consultants and others who are on the team will have a very good idea of, what that ultimate number is going to be.
And just since you mentioned CARB, I just read an article this morning about the new administration shortlist for EPA administrators, and the executive director of CARB is on this short list of 4 names. So you may have the executive director of CARB moving in to be the head honcho at headquarters at EPA, and when you combine what I said earlier about EOs on climate, and if that were to come to pass, then I think that we might even see, there's already been talk about, a Midwest coalition to develop a low carbon fuel standard. We saw it in carbon trading, from utilities, we saw regional carbon markets developed, right? So where this goes in terms of expansion could affect valuation one way or the other. But it's something that, this topic is so topical and timely right now in terms of just watching what could happen to it and on it over the coming years.
As a matter of fact, Dave, I think that, if it comes to pass that, the CARB executive director becomes secretary of EPA, you'd have to actually wonder whether or not there would be a push for a national fuel carbon intensity standard, where you would take the California model writ large. Now, unless the Senate were to flip, I don't think that could happen or is likely to happen, but there would probably be a push for it. And if you got the right coalition, like, a bunch of dairy farms all throughout the Midwest and other agricultural interests pushing for it too, you never know what could happen. But this, I think, overall really shows a lot of promise in doing something useful with the nutrient resources that farms have. We haven't talked much about nutrient separation, but people are getting better and better at that, and these are getting to be components of the programs that are getting of the projects that are getting financed for these purposes. So I think, including renewable energy, several of these projects I'm working on, there's a lot of solar power and things coming into play too, because that actually contributes to a better CI score, right? If the energy being used to power the digester and other farm operations is renewable, that can dramatically impact the CI score for the good.
I'm sorry, Jordan. The other thing I would say about market development and sustainability of the market is, regardless of governmental programs, you see a lot of private companies that have large fleets committing to goals of waste management, for example, has one of the largest fleets in the country when you think about it, right? East Coast to West Coast. And they have just released a sustainability report that has, they've already got like 35% of their fleet on renewable natural gas. And they've announced goals to get to like 70% of their fleet by 2030. And so you've got companies like, UPS, Amazon. So I think fleets will drive, and a lot of that is just bringing back, ESG, sustainability back to shareholders in some of those companies. So I think that'll be a separate driver as well that will keep this train rolling.
I think, Dave, you're absolutely right. And now, look, it's not going to be the $90 a decatherm kind of money, but it's going to be money that will make these projects, that could well make these projects pencil out over the years. Yeah, you're not going to get, 80% return on investment. Maybe you get 4 or 5, and you get a lot of other good things done. And that's especially going to become important after the California program is fully subscribed in the next several years.
Thank you for that. We have several other questions. We'll move on. Someone asked about who are some of the developers in Wisconsin that are looking to build these RNG facilities. You may not want to share all the names, but maybe the types of groups involved and where you think it's possible, maybe even some of the names.
Yeah, I think we can do that, Jordan. We're not going to make any commentary on them because we don't want to get into a problem here. But Jordan, why don't you describe either some by name and it's not an endorsement of any one way or the other, but some that we've been dealing with and or by organization.
Sure, I can name a few names. Some are clients, some are not. The ones that are have allowed me to disclose it. But the first one I talked about is Rev LNG, the DTE subsidiary. Those are the big guns, I guess I would say. I've already given you a little bit of a description of what to expect from them on the economics and the structure and so on. Another one, which I think is going to be pretty significant in Wisconsin, is OSEP. That stands for Outagamie Clean Energy Partners. They've already got one under construction. There's an outfit called US Gain, which is a subsidiary of US Oil. I know they've already got steel in the ground, and they are going to be more on the farm owns it side, I think. Although they don't have a specific sort of project structure that they're insisting on. There's an outfit called Sandhill in Wisconsin. They don't have right now any projects under construction, but they're certainly in the works of doing so. And those are just a few of the several that I can think of off the top of my head right now.
All right, thank you. We have a question about where do mitigation strategies and this is maybe a little too technical, but we'll see if you all have an opinion on it. Where do mitigation strategies of methane emissions fit into the carbon credit aggregation schemes, assuming validation and guidance protocols are in place? Those emissions account for 75 to 80% of ruminant methane production. There are feeding technologies and different diets, maybe that and feeding additives that can reduce methane emissions.
Yeah,
is that something they're looking at?
I certainly get the gist of the question. We're not there yet, to my knowledge. We're talking about methane emissions avoided from manure. If we can migrate these programs to methane, to monetize methane emissions avoided from the ruminant of the cattle, the digestion process, if you will, of the cattle, and feed improvements that can get at that. That's down the road a piece. I think it's a really good comment and something to keep in mind, but there isn't there isn't really a pathway for that right now. But I think that if there's this renewable renaissance that's going to occur, I think everything's on the table.
Thank you. Another sort of technical question came in about whether or not digestion would change the nutrients in the manure. At least my understanding is it does not. I mean, obviously, depending on the system you use, those things are repackaged a bit, right? You might have some digestate that contains part of those, but you're not losing anything.
That's right, John. That's our experience as well, is that the process of digestion for methane capture doesn't do the digestate doesn't really do anything to the P or N, that's in the income that results in the outflow.
Another question about what if digesters are more scalable to smaller producer. They cite the examples from Germany. Many smaller farms are in the carbon credit revenue stream game there, with obviously the government playing a larger role and maybe subsidizing those projects. If you would like to sort of opine on future prospects for that here.
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at that, Dave. I think Germany's a much more different ballgame, right? They have a national policy on carbon emissions and on carbon credits that makes it very easy for the smaller operators to participate. Here, we just don't have that yet. And until we have a strong national and even state level policy here on these sorts of things, I think it's going to be a little harder for the smaller operations to do it without scaling up in the way that Dave mentioned on the hub and spoke sort of thing. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, those are subsidized programs. Here, this is all about, volume of offsets created in relation to amount of capital investment that is required. And so, that's a much more straight up economic return analysis than anything else, at least in terms of where we are currently.
Jordan, there's been a clarifying question about it, one of the comments that you made. They ask, Jordan made a comment that RNG investments made up to 2024 will pay out as planned. What's the assurance that, where does that come from, or why do you say that, and what makes that a reliable statement, I guess, is the person's question. What are you basing that on?
First of all, I'm going to tell you that because I work at the farm level and on the operational level, I'm not an expert on how these LCFS credits pay out, but I will tell you that I've read that there's predictions by the people most intensely involved on the developer side that any regulatory risk that's out there of the program becoming fully subscribed or sort of frozen in place is such that the consensus is that anything built through 2024 is probably okay.
We do have a few more questions at the panel. If you guys are happy, if you're able to stay on. If you're not, that's okay too.
I was just about to say I have a hard stop at the top of the hour where we are, so I have to drop off. But if Jordan's able to continue to participate, that's great.
I have 15 minutes.
Okay, well, we'll take those full 15 minutes. I want to thank Michael Best, both Dave and Jordan again. Also want to thank Dustin and his colleagues at UA 400 for sponsoring. So appreciate your time, Dave. If you don't mind, Jordan, we'll just roll through these last few questions to the extent that we're able to.
Thank you all.
The next question is, what are the geographic limits on the California low carbon program? And sort of the use of their metrics. Is that limited to the U.S. only? Again, my understanding, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Jordan, here, would be that it's not. I mean, basically, there's something regulatory that says that they can or can't use that there, but they're making trades outside the United States using that same methodology.
Well, I have heard but do not know that they are taking projects in Canada and maybe Mexico, but because you always have to have a contract path to be able to get the molecules into the pipeline and over to California. That's going to be kind of hard to do if you're not in North America. I do know for a fact that places as far afield as New York, Texas, Indiana, Ohio, Oregon have been participating in these programs.
There's a question about CI score again, and maybe one that we may not be able to answer today, but about how a farm would change their CI score. Looks like it's a little bit of a black box to us on how that all was arrived at. But do you have any sense for if there's wiggle room or things that the farm could do after the fact to try to improve, which I guess is actually making their score lower for that purpose?
I do think so, but I'm going to admit again that my knowledge is limited here, and that's where the people we work with at the engineering and consulting level are very, very good. I have heard things that can be done on the farm as part of these projects to lower the CI score, meaning make it better. One of those things I already mentioned was to use or install renewable energy sources to help the CI score. But that's very much an area where I leave it to the consultants to figure out with the farms. But there are people very knowledgeable about that who are accessible to this group.
All right, very good. And I know the same questioner asked the same question about sort of how long that would take. If they want to get in touch with us offline, maybe we can put them in touch with some of those same resources that Jordan just referenced. I think those are the same group of people that kind of can talk you through how that might be possible, what would be necessary, and what you'd be looking for from both the cost and a sort of timeline perspective. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, before I would hire those folks, and look, you can usually get a preliminary CI score, assessment done for somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000. But I tell you, I wouldn't spend that money unless I first found a developer or a group of developers that was interested in even assessing the farm. Because we have, direct contacts to many developers who we, on behalf of the farms, could identify, and who, they would send someone out there and within probably 20 minutes be able to assess whether they're interested. It's at that point where they become interested that the farm then wants to hire some of the people we work with to do a preliminary CI score project and assessment, so that going forward in negotiations, the farm has a good idea of what the potential economic value of the project is, and so they can leverage that knowledge in the negotiations with the developer.
Very good. I think that's it for questions. Thank you again, Jordan, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. It's been a really informative discussion, and the number of questions just shows the level of interest is very, very high. So thanks again. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you.